this is kind of became a ritual. I stop a few times and just notice the trees, the sunlight, all these different things. I force myself to be present.
I've always said that my favorite thing to do is cheers, like to prost, salud, all that, because it's one of the most in the present things you can do. Like you're literally commemorating being in the present. Hello, this is Anya Leonard, founder and director of Classical Wisdom, a site dedicated to bringing ancient wisdom to modern minds. You can now find us, along with our free newsletter, at classicalwisdom.substack.com. Today I'm talking with Vitaliy Katsenelson, a podcaster and expert on value investing and author of the recent book on Stoicism called Soul in the Game. But before we begin, a quick thank you to our Classical Wisdom Society members who make this podcast possible. If you would like to become a member and help support the classics, go to classicalwisdom.substack.com and click subscribe. Now on to Stoicism, investing, and the former Soviet Union. Now, you have written a very interesting and engaging book with great stories in it called Soul in the Game. And one thing that I thought was really interesting is that you mentioned that you were almost done editing the book when you stumbled into Stoic philosophy, and then you actually just put the whole book on hold and embarked on this huge journey into Stoicism, which I just thought was fantastic and really shows the power of ancient philosophy and changing the course of one's life at times. But how did it exactly change your outlook?
Well, what really amazed me about Stoic philosophy was how, despite it being 2,000 years old, how it's really as relevant today as it was 2,000 years ago. I remember I was reading Seneca, and he was complaining how people are distracted all the time, and this is 2,000 years ago. This is before iPhone, Facebook, and Instagram. And he was basically complaining, how if their time is fragmented, they can't focus on one thing. And when I read this, I'm like, my God, people really have not changed, have they? So I've used Stoic philosophy as an operating system for life. It's basically, what happens is this: when we are born, we have a hardware and software. And that software, the operating system, how we behave, is randomly written by our parents, by events that happen to us, by our friends, by circumstances. And what Stoic philosophy does, it kind of provides a more organized operating system that helps us to deal with with everyday life. And what it does, helps you to minimize negative emotions, basically, the kind of volatility of negative emotions, and therefore kind of increase tranquility we have in our life.
I love the point, too, where you were saying about the distractions and this 2,000-year-old philosophy. One thing that I always take away is it gives you a much bigger perspective on things, to realize that we humans have had all this stuff for thousands of years. And it's like stepping out of your body for a second and stepping out of current events and stepping out of the distractions and looking and seeing this sort of chain of human events. It kind of gives you a bigger picture and a different perspective. But you mentioned operating systems. What are some of your favorite operating systems that you get from Stoicism?
I think so. Let me tell you what actually got me the exact dichotomy of control. That when I read that, was like inoculation. That was the inoculation moment into Stoic philosophy, because I realized how that could help me so much to deal with my everyday life. Because you realize some things are up to you, some things aren't, and you realize there are actually only very few things are up to you, right? It's what you think, what you value, how you behave. Everything else is really not up to you. And that realization, that was just absolutely incredible for me. So the dichotomy of control, the reframing, negative visualization, those are just probably my favorite frameworks.
With regards to the dichotomy of control, you mentioned in your book about Bill Irvine, who's
Mhm.
been on our podcast a few times and actually does the classical wisdom cruise to voyage and tour in search of Homer. But he introduced the idea of a trichotomy of control, which I
Mhm.
thought was great, referencing that. And you gave a really good example. So how has that specifically affected you?
So yeah, so the way to deal with the way you deal with the lack of control is that one thing you can control. There are some things you have no control over at all. You have no control if the sun is going to come out tomorrow. You have there's if you have no control of the weather, this kind of things. But you can control some things to some extent. When Bill uses example in his book, if you are preparing for a tennis match, you can't control if you win a tennis match, but you can control how you prepare. So, and the same thing when my son studies for his exams, he can't control what grade he's going to get, but what he can control is his preparation for the exams. So, what and this, by the way, this applies to my day job as a value investor. This applies so much to my job because what I can control as an investor is my process, how I analyze companies, how thoughtful I am, how good my process is. What I have no control over how the market is going to price my stocks on day-to-day basis. And that realization that my focus should not be on market's opinion on my stocks on a daily basis, but should really be on the quality of my research. It's actually, to be honest, I guess I've been a Stoic even before I read Stoic philosophy, because that's exactly how value investors do the research. I mean, I actually manage money, and just focus on the process, because realize there was so much randomness in the outcome, especially in the short term.
I've heard that so many times from people who, when they find Stoic philosophy, say, "Well, I think I've actually always been a Stoic. I just didn't have a name for it." Um, but it's interesting. You're saying, okay, you're this long term value investor, and before we start recording, we were talking about the fact that you're not an academic, and Stoicism has affected your life. But that's really good. That Stoicism as a philosophy isn't just for professors. It isn't just for people who want to spend their whole life, studying different types of philosophy and esoteric. I think it's really valuable to see how ancient philosophy can be applicable in a very modern life. Um, how would you say the Stoic philosophy has affected the way you view money?
Uh, Also, so I'll answer it, but let me let me make one comment. I think I'd like to call it actually Stoic practice, not Stoic philosophy. One of my favorite proverbs is knowing and not doing is not knowing. If you read about Stoic philosophy but you don't practice it, you might as well just basically not know it. So I the reason I call it practice is because I try to apply it every day in my life, knowing that I'm gonna fail plenty. But my job is, when I fail, is to learn, kind of, and be kind to myself, not to overly polish myself, and just move forward. So first of all, I look money as a positive preference. Like it's nice to have it. The more money you have it, the better. But it's a positive preference. If I have less money, it's not going to have um, it should not change the way I live my life. Um, I also, as an investor, I look at money. It's expected when you're in finance. When somebody manages money, when you're in finance, it's almost, you have these images of a fat cat who has I remember there was a scene in Breaking Bad where he had this tens of millions of dollars in the storage lot in the storage thing in the storage room, and he was just laying on this money. That's that's usually the images for people have when they think about somebody in finance, how the relationship is money. Uh, I look at money as just as a, like you need a certain amount of money to be able to eat, and to do things. But after a certain level, and I think there were studies that showed after $90,000 a year or something, incremental dollars brings very little happiness. So it's kind of it's a very interesting relationship. So a lot of money will not make you happy, but money below a certain level could make you unhappy. Now, Stoics have a very good way to deal with that. I think the Seneca has the saying, money is a slave of a wise man and a master of a fool. So, and I think a lot of times, especially in our very consumerist society, it's becoming a lot of times a master of us, because now we kind of veer off a little bit of Stoic topic. But in the book, I talk about, kind of a personal finance advice I received from my friend when I got married 20 plus years ago. And one of the first thing, he taught me is that you need to have a budget. Okay. Because what happens a lot of times with us, we spend money mindlessly. Meaning, I'll give an example. Let's say you just got a new job and you drive into work for the first time and there was a Starbucks on the way. You stop by Starbucks, you bought coffee. Next day, you do the same thing over and over again. And then you realize that maybe over a year, you spend, I don't know, $1,500 on Starbucks. Now, if you really value Starbucks, if you actually receive a lot of pleasure from drinking this Frappuccino, that's one thing. A lot of times, but if you were just doing it because you were doing it kind of because you could develop this habit, then this $1,500 actually did not buy you very much because you didn't really enjoy it. So now what budget allows you to do, and I'm just kind of keeping it at a very high level, allows you prioritize your spending. Some things you have no control over your cable bill, etc. But you can control, if you look at your spending and you see that you're spending $1,500 a year on Starbucks, then you should ask yourself a question: am I really enjoying it? Is it worth to me $1,500? Or that's the money I should spend on another vacation? Suddenly you realize, because no matter how much money you make, you can always spend more. So, this is why if you just spend money mindlessly, then it becomes your master.
Well, yeah, and I think a lot of the Stoics would say, and a lot of ancient philosophy in general, that sometimes it's not about making more money, it's about wanting less and,
Yes.
enjoying what you have. And I mean, I personally would say investing your time and energy in family and relationships and friendships, and that can be as valuable as the time spent making more money. And to that point, I mean, many times, and I'm sure everybody has had experienced this anecdotally, like I've known friends who have gone from being very poor to very rich, and they didn't become any happier for it. Like, wealth doesn't bring you happiness. It could be a tool. It can be something you can use to do things that you want. But if you view it as an end goal, you're not going to be happy no matter how much you have.
It gives you choices, yes. I think happiness come from wanting what you have. Yes, that's exactly right.
Now, you mentioned using different Stoic practices, but I personally, I've always been a bit of an advocate, actually, for the art of cherry picking, in which we find the good in different philosophies and maybe leave out some of the things that don't gel as much, but that you don't have to throw the whole baby out with the bathwater type thing. So what would you say you've left out of Stoic philosophy?
Oh, I can tell you exactly what I left out. Which probably by saying this, I'll get completely kicked out of all Stoic future podcasts and Stoicons, and I'll get disinvited from Plato Academy. Cardinal virtues. I completely left them out from my book. And actually, I admitted that in the book, like wisdom, courage, temperance, justice. I understand them intellectually, but for some reason, to me, they never really clicked with me on a practical level. So I left them out.
And do you think that they work for other people practically, or?
Yeah, so it's very important to understand how I wrote the book. So this book, and Zeno has this beautiful. I think Seneca was quoting Zeno, when Zeno was saying, I'm basically talking to you not as a physician talking to a patient, but just one patient talking to another. And this is how I was writing this book. I was basically explaining, this is how I approach life. This is me. I'm a unique individual. This is how I look at the world. Some of the things will apply to you, a lot of things won't. And that's okay. My goal was to spark a thought. Maybe if something clicks with you, maybe you'll take it up. But I was not instructing you what to do, and I was not trying to profess that what I'm saying is universal. So I think if somebody else reads that, and if somebody else studies Stoic philosophy and they find that wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice click with them, and they can apply it in the practice, that's great. It's just, for me, the way, based on my history, based on me as an individual, it was not something that I could feel like I'd apply it on a practical level. And I didn't want to be hypocrite. So in other words, I didn't want to just write something just to appear to be Stoic. Okay. So that's why I left it out.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand that. I fear that some of the terms too we're not really raised with those ideas as much anymore. So I can see how they don't really connect. I don't know if maybe the solution is to bring up the ideas of temperance and courage and that kind of stuff more. They kind of seem outdated terms almost. That I can see how it's kind of tricky to connect with.
By the way, I'm not saying I'm right. I'm saying I'm right. That's right for me, right?
Yep.
For somebody else who reads it and they be able to interpret it differently and may change their lives. Just for me, that was something I couldn't relate to.
For me, no way am I ever doing cold showers. I'm sorry, not happening.
No, not. But you know what? So it's kind of interesting. So the cold showers was my thing, right? But for somebody else could be something else. Like, like I take cold showers, and for me, that was overcoming this uneasiness of doing it. For somebody else could be going for a run. Like for me, like I'll give an example. So for you, maybe it's going for a run, and there is no way I'm going for a run. So
Yeah.
it's just so
I'm not going for a run either.
All right.
But I think it's important to sometimes pick the things that resonate. And for me, like I definitely enjoy a lot of elements of Epicureanism, and with the capital E, not like the apps that people think of these days. But when you were mentioning Starbucks coffee, for instance, I think sometimes it's very important to enjoy a ritual of a hot drink, that
Yeah.
in enjoying it at just the right temperature. It doesn't have to be an expensive drink. It doesn't have to be a very cheap drink, but sometimes just the appreciation of a moment when that drink is the exact temperature that you want to enjoy it at.
This book, I call it a volume 1, meaning that when I was writing this book about life, my wife tells me, aren't you a little bit too young to write about this? Like, because I'm in my 40s still, and isn't something you should be writing the kind of at the sunset of your life? And I can see a point here that, I'm going to be smarter and wiser 10 years from now and 20 years from now. But then I realized that I don't have to look at it as a definitive thoughts on life, because as I evolve, so my thinking will evolve as well. And as I can keep writing, I can keep updating my thoughts on this. Now, so I'm working on the chapter right now on mindfulness, and I'm coming to your hot drink, and one of so let me give you a couple analogies. They're not in the book, so this is brand new stuff. Okay, so you can go through life 2 different ways. Imagine you arrive to a brand new city and you wanted to see the city for a long, long time. You arrive to the airport, you got off the plane, you have a baggage checked in, and you look at this airport and it looks just like any other airport you've been to. White walls, gray carpet, blue seats, kind of very sterile. And so you mentally looking, the first thing you're looking for is baggage claim sign. You found it. And you just going forward to the baggage claim sign, you're making turns left and right, taking escalators, etc. And there are people around you, you don't notice them. there are shops and different things around you. You notice none of that because you're just looking for this baggage claim sign, because your trip will mentally begin when you got the baggage in your hands and you get into Uber. Okay, so you just spend 20 minutes going through the airport. You notice absolutely nothing, but that you've been focused on the baggage claim sign. Okay, so now keep this mental framework. Okay, now let me give you another one. You are in the art museum. Okay, and let's say you are the exhibit of your favorite artist. For me, it would be Impressionists. And you're slowly going from painting to painting. There is yes, you can see an exit sign kind of, but you're not really paying attention to this. You are in Moulin Rouge, or you are in, I don't know, somewhere south of France. And you finish looking at one painting, you slowly go to another. Okay, so and time kind of stops existing. So you don't know what time it is, or you just focused on those paintings, on being there. So those are two different ways you can go through life. The first way is you are looking for baggage claim, whatever you're doing. Okay, either you're thinking about it's Monday and you're thinking about, oh, I wish it was already Friday or the weekend, or you're thinking about the vacation you're going to have, 6 months from now in Hawaii. Another way you can go through life and you notice things. Okay, you have this cup of coffee from Starbucks, and you're holding this, and you actually activate your senses because you feel the warmth of this coffee. You actually you smell it. You've been present. Okay, I would argue it's probably impossible to be in the art museum mode all the time, because you get nothing done. But at the same time, I would argue that if you spend your whole life in the airport kind of baggage claim mode, you will go through mind kind of mindlessly, because you're always going to be in the future, not in the present, or you're always going to be kind of stuck in the past, kind of thinking about what happened yesterday. So being present, mindful, and being in this moment is very important. I go to the park, I go for a walk once a day. I do this religiously. And this is kind of became a ritual. I stop a few times and just notice the trees, the sunlight, all these different things. I force myself to be present.
I've always said that my favorite thing to do is cheers, like to salud, all that, because it's one of the most in the present things you can do. Like, you're literally commemorating being in the present. And I think it is very important. I mean, especially for people who can easily be preoccupied or anxious, or, and I like to take my daily walks too. And every day, there'll be a moment where I realize I'm totally inside my head. And I go, wait, look out. And you literally, it's like you look from inside of your head out, and you look around for a second. You go, oh, wait, there's a whole world around me. It's good to realize.
It's like fish. If you think about fish does not know that's in the water, right? It's just been, because that's the natural environment for it, right? Think about it for a second. We have all the senses: smell, eyesight, touch, right? But hearing, but we use the senses all the time, right? And we do use them subconsciously at this point. And therefore, actually, when you are sitting on the bench and you close, close your eyes and just listen to the sound, you start hearing, actually, you activate your sense of hearing, and you start hearing noises and sounds that you are hearing but not noticing. And that's being present. And so it's like, so we almost need to retrain ourselves. And I do this, by the way, I do this every morning. When I brush my teeth, I do this. When I do push-ups in the morning, I force myself. This is the time where the minute and a half when I'm being present. And if you do this a little bit every day, you retrain yourself to be present more, just through little exercises, whatever it is. It's if you stop, if you walk in the park, you stop a few times and just like just look, it's a one time you notice when people do this, when connoisseurs of wine, like when they lift the glass and they smell it and they close their eyes, they've been present at that moment. They're completely present, right? So that's, you want to be in that, mode just a little bit more often.
Now, not to be too contrarian or anything, but when you were first saying about the baggage claim
Yeah.
example, which I thought was a really clear example, but I almost thought it was going to be a different outcome in a way,
Okay.
where it was, you were getting rid of all the distractions of life, that the shops were like TikTok and Instagram, and that the baggage claim was like bigger goals in your life and bigger perspective, and that it's positive in a way to like zone out all of the noise.
You can flip that. Let me give you this analogy. When I was working on the Stoic philosophy chapter, I was completely in the museum mode. Okay, I was trying to learn as much as I could. So my senses were completely activated, right? When I sat down to write that, and I took a lot of notes in the process, I would go to my notes, and at that point, I would completely zoned out, right? There was a time for both. My problem is, a lot of times we want to be somewhere else and we are not present. And so it's I think that's kind of the point. Like when you're talking about you holding the Starbucks cup of coffee and you are actually smelling the coffee and actually feeling the warmth of the cup, if you're focused on this, you've been present. So I don't think it's a contrasting idea. It's just, I guess, applying it a little bit differently.
Yeah, and knowing, I mean, that would be a very good Stoic thing to say, is to realize when to use those different modes. That's
Absolutely.
something that would be important. Now, having talked a bit about thinking about the future and being present, I'd like to go to the past for a moment and ask about your upbringing, because you've written quite a bit about the fact that you had grown up in the Soviet culture. And I guess it's kind of interesting, because one of the greatest misconceptions of Stoicism is, Stoicism with a lower S is the kind of, showing a feeling and everything, versus the Stoicism with a capital S is for those of us who like to enjoy the actual ancient philosophy. How would you say Stoicism with a capital S kind of interacted in your upbringing?
Well, first of all, I think it would appreciate, like now looking back, I appreciate my life in the United States so much better, because I grew up in Soviet Russia, and we experienced a lot of scarcity. Okay, so my parents, and in all fairness, like I probably experienced Soviet Russia a lot less because I was very young. I came to the United States when I was 18, but my parents experienced it a lot more, because you would go to the store, you have bare shelves. So my parents constantly were stressed about how they're going to feed us. Okay, we were never hungry, etc. But it was buying meat and eggs, something you take for granted today when you live in the United States. That was something that my parents had to worry about. Now, one thing I would argue, it made us appreciate things a lot more, because when we grow up with abundance, as we have in the United States, you actually don't appreciate things a lot. So let me give you this very very interesting example. So I had Coke or Pepsi. Actually, I had Pepsi once in my life when I was in Russia, when I was, I forget, maybe 15, 16 years old. And remember how much I loved it. It was this absolutely incredible drink. And so that was the only time I had it. Then I come to the United States, I go to the grocery store, and I realize I can buy Coke or Pepsi by a gallon. And Anya, for the next 3 years, I consumed more Coke than I did over the previous 18 years of my life. And I remember this moment vividly. I was sitting at the Village Inn restaurant, and I had my third refill of Coke. And I realized when I was drinking it, I could not taste it. It tasted like just like water. And all that, like the that feeling I had when I had, when I had Pepsi in Russia, that the great taste of it was completely gone. Because what happens is when you have it every day, all the time, when you have this abundance, you stop valuing it. You get desensitized. So there is a, I guess you could argue that maybe temperance, one of the cardinal values, I completely dismissed. Maybe that so but maybe that's something we should embrace. Um, that there is a lot of value in scarcity, and there is a value in negative, and also, there is a value in scarcity because you start valuing things more, and you can, and so after that moment, by the way, what I started doing, I told myself I'm only going to have Coke when I go to movie theater. I go see movies maybe 3-4 times a year. And this was 25 or more years ago, you know, and I basically, since then, I only had Coke or Pepsi when I went to see a movie. Uh, and I'll tell you this, I enjoyed that wonderful product full of calories and sugar so much more than when I had it every single day, 5 times a day.
Oh, I can imagine. Your teeth are probably much happier also.
My dentist is less happy because he sees me less, but yes.
I'm down here in South America, and one thing that I like a lot is this. Not saying scarcity can kind of be confusing. Sometimes it's just the natural order of things. So, for instance, in the U.S., you can buy strawberries all year round, even when it's
Mhm.
not strawberry season. But here, you buy your fruit in these little fruit stalls that just come straight from the farms and buses and trucks, and it's just these little stalls. And the moment when you first see raspberries again, because they've come in season, and you get so excited, and you're like, oh yes, we've got raspberries again. And you really enjoy it because you haven't had raspberries at any moment. You only get them when they're in season, and they taste really good. They're fresh, and there's another added benefit, I feel like, of kind of being more in touch with like natural cycles. You're like, okay, now we get stone fruits, and you're more aware of these things that
Mm.
I fear that when I lived in the US as a kid, I would have never appreciated at all. I wouldn't have had any realization of those natural cycles. So I'm wondering, for people who are living with abundance, um, congratulations. I'm happy for all you listeners who are living with abundance. That's wonderful. But how can we recreate these feelings to find that? I mean, I like your rule of, having Coca-Cola and in the cinema, but you think of like Marcus Aurelius practicing sleeping on the floor. Like, how do we encourage ourselves and our society to build that anti-fragility and experience scarcity when there might not be scarcity?
I think we kind of have to impose it. We have to impose it on ourselves. My kids and I have this tradition. When I drive them to school, once a month, I get them donuts. Once a month, not more often than that. And I tell you this, like before being instituted once a month thing, if we would do it on a semi-regular basis, I don't think they valued it as much. Now we do it, they say it's a new month. So I know exactly what they're talking about. And I tell you, they just because we say we only do it once a month, that's how we uh, created this, kind of constraint. So you can create this constraints on yourself. You can, I guess you can go and Stoics actually, put themselves through a lot more abuse that we are willing to do. But you can also say, I only buy strawberries in season. So when you go to the grocery store, and by the way, it's like American, you go to American supermarket and they may have strawberries off season, but they taste absolutely horrible. I mean, they taste like complete like plastic. Like they look like strawberries, but they don't taste like strawberries. So what you can do, you can say I only buy strawberries in the summertime.
That's good. That's a good idea. I think people would have to do a bit of research to know when it's strawberry
That's right,
season.
when the season is, yes. Yeah.
But that's good. It's good to learn those things. Um, now, I saw some other interesting thoughts that you had in your book, and I mean there was plenty, but there was a few I wanted to touch on,
Mm.
and one of which was the idea of having good thoughts in order to achieve happiness. But then you also comment that that we believe that we have control over what we think. We do not. So most of the time, we're not even aware of what we're thinking. So how much control do you think we have over our thinking?
All right, that requires another mental model. Okay, so to describe, to explain this. So I think of a mind as basically have a conscious mind, subconscious mind. Okay. Subconscious mind is this computer that we have, it's extremely powerful computer that we have. That is a, like, think about our conscious mind has been an iPhone, and subconscious mind has been this Amazon Web Services, like super, super huge mainframe. The the problem is a lot of we spend most of our time in our subconscious mind, just kind of thinking about, think about the future, the past, spending very little time in the present. So I found that meditation, like when people talk about meditation, usually that's not what they talk about. They think about feeling calmer, etc. Well, after they meditate, what meditation allows you to do is to notice your thoughts. Okay, so in other words, it's almost like consciously observing your subconscious thoughts. And what happens a lot of times, once we notice those thoughts that give us a lot of pain, by noticing them, we actually, it's almost like we are making them less powerful. So if you have a lot of negative thoughts, if you just sit down for a few minutes, and if you, well, first of all, if I was number one, you probably need to meditate, to be able to do this. But in general, but if you notice a negative thought, just by noticing it and observing it, you are making it a lot less powerful. And you can, and I think that's something, that's something I do all the time. I remember I was driving somewhere and I was very upset about the bookkeeper I just fired. And I noticed that this experience kind of occupied my mind, and noticing it completely neutralized it. Yeah.
I think that's very well explained. And
Thank
and
you.
I think it's great practice to the meditation, to be aware of our thoughts, to be like you said, that I think that's another whole element of mindful.
Let me tell you this: the meditation, kind of like Stoic philosophy, gets a bad rap because, like, Stoic philosophy has been ruined by. Actually, I don't know how it got a bad name, but somehow it did. But meditation got ruined by a poster. Like, like when you think about meditation, I think about a poster you see in a doctor's room or something, this beautiful sunset or sunrise, I'm not sure, like a beautiful landscape, this skinny woman with a ponytail sitting on the, at the edge of the cliff and looking at this sun. And that's what people think meditation is. A lot of times meditation is basically you sit in anywhere. You can do meditation at anywhere except when you're driving, maybe. Don't do it when you're driving. Okay. But you can sit in your chair and just close your eyes and just observe your thoughts. Observe your thoughts for a few minutes. Some people can do it for hours. I meditate on a good day for 10 minutes. I try to meditate for at least a few minutes a day now. And that's enough for me. And all I'm doing, I am just training my mind to observe my own thoughts. That's all I'm doing.
Yeah, I think it's very important. And I recently had a podcast with Massimo Pigliucci, who often writes about Stoicism as well. And he was saying about incurring virtue and instilling it and encouraging it, both in ourselves and in children. And he referenced meditation being a very good one, journaling, and this idea of being very aware of our thoughts. But now, you have been very generous with your time. So I want to give you one final question to finish us up. And that is in reference to your book. which is called The Soul in the Game. And so I just want you to explain maybe for a second, what does the title mean?
Yeah. So Nassim Taleb, who is one of my favorite thinkers, he has this book called Skin in the Game. And in this book, he had this chapter, Soul in the Game. And when I read this book, which had, I don't know, 500 pages, the chapter was, I don't know, 5 pages long. That chapter had a bigger impact on me than the whole book. And what Soul in the Game is basically when you do something that is very important to you, like you're doing this podcast, it has all of you. Okay. In other words, it completely consumes you. It becomes part of your identity. And here's the thing, you will never do anything for money or that would diminish the quality of this podcast. If you would not sacrifice your values for this podcast, that's, to me, that's a kind of mental framework of how I approach life. I love what I do, and it has complete, like I love investing, I love writing, and therefore it has all of me, and it's part of my identity, and therefore I will never do anything that would kind of go against my beliefs, when I do this. And it also assumes you have skin in the game. So in my example, as an investor, I manage money for other people, but also I have all of my liquid net worth invested in the same companies my clients invest. And therefore, it's almost like, when you go to, like, imagine you go to a restaurant and you go to this fancy restaurant and the cook eats McDonald's or a food from another takeout restaurant. You probably think maybe I should not be eating this restaurant because the guy thinks his food is not good enough for him. So that, so you also have, skin in, you also have to have skin in the game as well. It's almost like if you would, when somebody asks, should I be listening to your podcast? Like if somebody, okay, this is a good example. If somebody says, Anya, should I be listening to your podcast if I wanted to learn about Stoic philosophy? Let's say it's your dear friend, somebody who you care, or your child. You say, no, you listen to somebody else's podcast. My podcast is not good enough for you, kind of thing. So that means you have no skin in the game completely. So and therefore you have little soul in the game. So that's what basically, soul in the game means.
Well, thank you so much. I think it's like I said, it was a really very readable book, and one where you just kind of get sucked into the stories very quickly. I think for a philosophy book to be kind of a page turner is always a success. So thank you very much.
Anya, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Classical Wisdom Speaks, a podcast dedicated to bringing ancient wisdom to modern minds. Please go to classicalwisdom.substack.com to learn more about our work or sign up for our free newsletter. To learn more about Vitaliy's work, please go to his website, contrarianedge.com. The link is below. Thank you.